So Buruchot Habaot, ladies, and thank you so much for logging on, whether you're tuning into Torah Anytime or to ohelsorah.com, or whether you're logging into our live feed on Zoom. Just so you know, I'm going to be back and forth between the screens, and some of you are on Zoom, some of you are getting the live feed off of Torah Anytime, which is up there. That's why I seem a little bit far away from this screen here. But the point is that we're all doing whatever we can in order to accommodate everybody who's logging in, not just on Zoom, but also Torah Anytime and ohelsorah.com. So thank you so much for all of those who are making their efforts to join us here tonight, to get inspired by the Divrei Torah that you're about to hear tonight, Be'ezrat Hashem. And also a special mention to my mother, who is in Las Vegas, Nevada, 3 hours behind, but somehow she manages to log in. Ima, I don't see you, but I'm so happy that you're here. I love you. You're the best. Okay. You should have a long life, Ima. חיים ארוכים, חיים של שלום, חיים של פרנסה טובה, בשפע, חיים של עושר וכבוד בעזרת השם, for all the good that you do. I have to dedicate this shiur, unfortunately, to 2 individuals that tragically are no longer with us. The first one is a young man who 4 years ago was on an Amtrak train, and he was a United States Navy officer. He was in the Naval Academy, and there was the huge accident on Amtrak, and he was nifter at age 20. This is a young man who was beginning to discover his Jewish roots. He even had a chavrusa in the Navy, and he was on his way to becoming religious, and unfortunately he passed away in that tragic accident. Tonight is his yahrzeit. Yaakov Ephraim ben Chaim Shmuel alav hashalom, shavani lui neshama. And also, unfortunately, last week, Shabat, late Friday night, there was tragic news in our Brooklyn community that a young 20-year-old girl was found nifteret in the most brutal of circumstances. We shouldn't hear of these things. Yehudit Perel bat Michael aleh shalom, she was 20 years old. The police is investigating how she passed away. Unfortunately, they're suspecting foul play from, I don't want to say from what, but whatever the case may be. I know Yehudit Perel since she's 7 years old. It's one of the most tragic situations that we could imagine. The parents are grieving terribly, as you can well imagine. We want to extend ourselves to the parents, to Michael and Irit Biton, who just got up from Shiva 2 days ago. Be'ezrat Hashem, they should see nachat from the rest of their children and grandchildren. And anybody who, I know that the people who are tuning in at Torah Anytime are always logging on to ohelsorah.com and making their donations. We are now collecting for Yehudit's family to be able to help them raise the little daughter that she left behind. Little Shira was 2 years old. Anybody that wants to make a donation can log on to ohelsorah.com and make that donation. Let us begin. We have a lot to do. This coming week, Be'ezrat Hashem, is Parashat Bamidbar. And we're just a week and a half away from Chag Shavuot, which is called Zman Matan Toratenu. Could you believe we're up to Shavuot already? We are up to Shavuot. Some of us cannot believe this. That's the time that Am Yisrael received the Torah at Har Sinai. So we're going to discuss the parasha, but we're also going to learn a few insights into Shavuot, so we're prepared for this great Chag. Parashat Bamidbar discusses how the Jewish people traveled in the desert. And the Torah HaKdosha goes into great detail to inform us the formation of how the Jewish people walked in the desert, how they traveled, their travels, which means it wasn't a multitude of people that Pashut walked in a single file. Every tribe stood in a special place that was designated by Moshe Rabbeinu according to the instructions of the Ribono Shel Olam. So you had one tribe standing to the northwest, one to the southeast, one was to the north, another to the east. Each tribe had to stand in a specific formation, and they traveled in the shape of a square with the Mishkan being carried in the middle. And the Pasuk tells us, Ka'asher yachanu ken yisa'u. In the way that they were encamped, in that formation, that square box formation, so too they traveled in that formation as well. Ka'asher yachanu, in the manner that they were encamped, ken yisa'u. So too they traveled. It was the same formation. They traveled as these tribes traveled. But there's an interesting interpretation regarding this pasuk that actually applies to us. How so? You see, many times when people are in their own homes, they tend to be very meticulous concerning halachot, the laws of the Torah. For example, the laws of kashrut. They're people who wouldn't think of bringing something into their house that was not kosher, that's taref, that doesn't have a proper hechsher. Some people wouldn't think of davening without a minyan. Some people would not think of doing certain mitzvot. They want to daven. Some people are extremely careful with their tzniut and other laws, other halachot. However, when they are on the road, when they travel, they suddenly become less careful. Suddenly they start compromising. Pitom, they'll go into a restaurant in some remote place that's not so kasher, and they will only eat fish and salad. Pitom, if they're in another place, other than their house, they dress differently when they go on vacation. They make all kinds of rationalizations to engage in this loose behavior, which is contrary to how they would behave in the confines of their own homes or in their own communities. So the pasuk is telling us, Ka'asher yachanu, just like you act when you're encamped, which means when you're in your own home, when you're in your own dalet amot, ken yisa'u. So too when you travel, when you go out of your house, it should be the same level of observance, the same standard. A person should not lose his spiritual standards just because he's on the road somewhere, because he's traveling. And it's not just talking about people who go away on a vacation to another part of the world. It might also be referring to people who, for example, go away for the summer, to their summer homes, or to bungalow colonies. This pasuk is telling us to be careful, even if you're going to a home away from home. We have to be very careful, because very often it happens that the mentality of summer vacation leads us to shed some of the standards we may have had during the winter months. Therefore, the Torah HaKdosha is telling us that as a Jew, the concept is Ka'asher yachanu. Just like you're stationed in your permanent dwelling, you have a certain standard of religion, ken yisa'u. So too when you travel, whether it's abroad on business or for a vacation, or even if it's just, if you're going away for just for a Shabbat, you should maintain the same standards. Just because you're in a different state or in a different climate, and just because the rest of the world is more loose in their behavior, that shouldn't give you the opening to breach the Torah's fences. The Torah is asking us to be consistent in our behavior under all circumstances. Now, interestingly, I once read that the Chafetz Chaim used to travel with a sealed bag whenever he went away. And I know it's going to sound a little morbid to some of you, but when one of the Talmidim got a hold of that bag and they opened up the bag, you know what was inside that bag? Tachrichim, shrouds. That's the material that the Chevra Kadisha Lo Alenu uses to bury a person. Could you imagine? So they asked the Chafetz Chaim, why do you carry these shrouds along with you on your trip? And he said, I only carry it when I travel because there's a tendency to be a little bit more lenient when you're on the road. Therefore, I'm reminding myself to put life into proper perspective. The Chafetz Chaim Alav Shalom carried the tachrichim of a dead person with him in order to remind himself never to falter from the proper path. Now, ladies, I am not suggesting now that you pack tachrichim in your suitcase, not at all. The point is, however, you have to be very, very careful when you're out of your own environment. There's another explanation to this pasuk that actually concerns the Shabbat, and it's a beautiful explanation. As you know, there are different ways that we keep the Shabbat. One is on a physical level, and the other is on a spiritual level. Chachamim tell us that the Shabbat is not merely about dressing up in nice clothing, which is a good thing to do. Shabbat isn't only about eating delicious foods, lichavod Shabbat, which is also the right thing to do. Shabbat is also a day of rest. Not only rest of the physical, but rest from the physical. You know what that means? Because there's a difference. Rest from the physical means that Shabbat is a day that we devote to our spiritual needs. The Zohar Kadosh tells us that we have an extra neshama on Shabbat. It's called the neshama yetera. Therefore, Shabbat is supposed to be spent together with items that concern the Shabbat. That means the study of Torah, learning Torah, spending quality time with our children and husbands. It means spending time at the Shabbat table speaking words of Torah, singing Zmirot Shabbat. Shabbat is a time where we could even attend a shiur, Bezat Hashem. I know now we're in lockdown, but Bezat Hashem, it's the time. Look at all the Majits ladies. They venture out on Shabbat to attend a shiur without their usual schedules getting in the way. So that shows us that it's a day of uninterrupted ruchaniyut. That's what Shabbat is for. It's not just a day of leisure where you sit back on the couch and you relax. Shabbat and Yom Rishon, that's Sunday, they're two different days. Although the Goyim call it a weekend, and to them, Saturday and Sunday are just 2 days where you do nothing and you just hang out and hang around. Shabbat is not a day where we're just hanging out. Shabbat is not a day we're just hanging around. Shabbat doesn't mean that we could put on our shorts and t-shirt, leisure clothes, as long as we don't flick on the light. No, it's much more than that. Shabbat is a day for spiritual accomplishments. And you know this, for some of you that have logged on to ohelsarah.com and have taken the tour of the Shabbat classes, you know that. And for those of you who haven't yet, I recommend it highly to log on to ohelsarah.com and click on the Shabbat section. And we have a lot of classes there on Shabbat Kodesh. But especially now, ladies, during these pressing times, where we want to protect ourselves and our children so that we shouldn't fall into the trap of the foreign philosophies and ideologies that are actually destroying the world and removing us from the Ruchaniyut. It's so important to focus on Shabbat. You know, I once heard one rabbi tell his students, if you want to protect yourself and your children from the immorality of the outside world, inspire your children to keep the Shabbat on the strictest level, and they should involve themselves only with learning Torah on Shabbat. Don't read the newspaper on Shabbat. Don't read secular books on Shabbat. Don't flip through magazines on Shabbat. Shabbat should be a day of Torah, of tefillah, of singing, of praises to Hashem, tehillim. That's a day where you should occupy your time with religious, with spiritual and holy matters. And the kedusha of your Shabbat, said this rabbi, the kedusha of the Shabbat that you observe properly will travel with you and your children for the rest of the days of the week. You hear this, ladies? If your Shabbat is Kodesh, that's what's going to protect you and your children for the other 6 days of the week. Ladies, who needs more protection than members of our generation that are bombarded 6 days a week with the perversions that take place wherever we go? And I'll just give you one example. 30 years ago, all the Rabbanim were rebuking the people against bringing a television into their homes. And everybody at that time thought, oh, the Rabbanim are exaggerating, it's extreme. Does anybody know what's going on today on regular television? I'm not talking about cable television. I mean channel 2, channel 4, channel 7, the regular channels. You know what kids are watching on those channels? Please pardon what I'm going to tell you now, ladies. They see homosexuality being glorified, where there's a marriage between two members of the same gender. They hear foul language. They see women and men dressed, or rather I should say undressed. They see violence. They see immorality. They see adultery. They're being exposed to topics that no person should be exposed to. So when the rabbis were screaming 30 years ago and warning us, back then, television was considered comparatively clean. And everybody wondered, what are these rabbis screaming about? What's the big deal? What are they getting all excited about? But the Rabbanim saw exactly how big this monster was going to become. How do you monitor today's television, ladies? What do you say? I mean, well, we won't let our children watch cable television, and we're just going to watch with them the regular channels and we'll monitor them. Cable TV. I mean, you talk about cable TV, any channel today reeks of immorality, and you're sitting there and watching this corruption together with your children, and we think that's proper chinuch. That's how we want to educate our children. If we're supposed to be a role model for them, how do we sit there with them watching the same immorality and violence and glorified lifestyles that go against the values of our Torah? Explain that to me. We don't even realize that what our children watch affects their life in a permanent way. How could parents tolerate such a thing? How could anyone allow such a medium of destruction to be in the house when it's impossible to be monitored? That's why the rabbi of that congregation told that keilah, the kedusha of Shabbat protects you and your child throughout the rest of the week. The kedusha keeps you from being tainted from all the things that are taking place out there that are against the kedusha. Now ladies, of course, if a person sits in front of a television all day long, nothing could protect him. I'm talking about a person who's actually making an effort. That person is going to be protected from all the other things that he inadvertently sees and hears. But if you put yourself in the lion's den, nothing's going to protect you. Even if you're going to keep the Shabbat like Daniel Hanavi, if you watch the immorality on television every day, nothing's going to protect you from what your eyes see. So the pasuk is telling us the following: Ka'asher yachanu, as you rest, which means the way you observe the day of rest, Ka'asher yachanu, the manner in which you guard the Shabbat, ken yisa'u, that's the way you'll travel for the rest of the days of the week. Meaning the rest of the days of the week will be measured for success based on how you kept the Shabbat. So, and then the psukim and the parasha continue with the children of Moshe and Aharon. It states, and read you the words, Ele toledot Aharon u'Moshe. These are the generations of Aharon and Moshe. Beyom diber Hashem el Moshe behar Sinai. On the day that God spoke to Moshe at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai. And then we're told, Ve'ele shmot bnei Aharon. And these are the names of the sons of Aharon. And they were Nadav, Avihu, Elazar, and Itamar. The pasuk begins by informing us that these were the children of Moshe and Aharon. But we only hear about the children of Aharon. What happened to the children of Moshe? They're missing. The Gemara tells us that from here we see that the children of Aharon were considered like the children of Moshe. How so? Because it doesn't mean biologically. Chachamim explain that somebody who teaches your child Torah is as if they fathered them. It's as if they bore them. Since Moshe alav shalom taught Aharon's children Torah, the Torah uses the words, and these are the children of Aharon and Moshe. And then it lists Aharon's children because they were considered like the children of Moshe. So the Rabbanim learn a very important lesson from this, ladies. This is something that applies more to the teachers out there, but it's important for the parents to hear this as well so that you know exactly what's expected of the teachers. From here we learn that a teacher must regard the student not as a student where he's imparting information for the sake of receiving a paycheck at the end of the week. The Torah HaKadosha is telling us that the job of every teacher is to consider every student like a child. That's the standard of Torah teaching. Now that's totally different than the teacher who simply walks into the classroom to fulfill his or her duties. An algebra teacher could go into the classroom, give a great lesson in math, and he could walk out feeling very good that he did his job. And whether the kids understood him or not, it's not his problem. As far as this teacher is concerned, he taught the information in the most clear way, and whether somebody had difficulty with it or not, it's not his issue. He was told to teach algebra, and that's what he did. According to Torah standards, this kind of teaching is not very commendable. The teacher has to regard every student in that room as his own child. Because how would that teacher feel if his son was humiliated in that classroom by another teacher? That teacher, the father, would run to the school and he'd scream, "How dare you humiliate my child? We work so hard at home to build up his self-esteem and his confidence. How dare you crush his determination?" If a teacher doesn't treat the kids that he's teaching as his own children, he might just humiliate a child or throw a sharp line his way. Think about it. When our child misbehaves, we ask ourselves, why is he misbehaving? Did something happen? We investigate to determine if there's a problem with this kid. Maybe something's happening in the personal life of that child that we don't know about. We tend to judge our children very favorably, and we give them the benefit of the doubt, even though they don't always deserve it. So the same is true of a teacher. When a teacher sees a child misbehaving, it's not enough for that teacher to reprimand the child and throw him out of the class, because if that was your son who was misbehaving, wouldn't you treat your son a little differently? Wouldn't you take the time to talk to that child privately to see if anything's wrong, if something happened, if someone was bothering him? We know that misbehavior is a result of something. The children are reacting to something. So a teacher that regards the student as a child would investigate the cause of his misbehavior. How would we feel if our child was being neglected in the classroom, for example, because there are brighter students out there that the teacher seems to be giving all the attention to? As a parent, you would meet with that teacher and you'd say, "Hey, it's not fair. We pay just as much tuition as the other kids you're focusing on, and we have the same rights as anybody else in this classroom. So why are you only teaching 4 kids and ignoring the other kids in the class? Because the other ones are smarter?" So when you're teaching, you have to know that you're regarding each and every child as your own. And that means that everybody in the classroom deserves an equal education and equal attention. If your child wasn't the brightest boy, what would you tell his teacher? Would you go to the teacher and say, "You know what? Don't bother teaching him. Just, you know what? Just ignore him. Just let him sit in the back of the room playing tic-tac-toe"? Is that what you would tell the teacher? Of course not. You would encourage that teacher to raise your child's level of academics and to invest in his mind if it's possible. So let me ask you this. There are times when in one's own home, there are extreme circumstances that force a parent to tell the child, "I'm very sorry, I love you, but you can no longer live here." The child is on drugs, he's doing the craziest things that's influencing everybody in the house in a terrible way, and no matter how much you try to help rehabilitate that child, it's just not working. And then after consulting with big name rabbis, you realize you have no other choice or no other option, and you know you have to tell that child, "We love you, but unfortunately you cannot live here with us until you feel you could change your ways." And sadly, the child leaves. I ask you this. Would you be able to sleep well that night? Yes or no? I'm asking you ladies. Would you be able to sleep well that night? Can a parent ever sleep after this? Although you did what you had to do, it's done with great anguish and pain. The same has to be true of a teacher or a principal of a school. A teacher or principal that can have a child expelled from school has to imagine that that kid is his own. Once the child is expelled, should the teacher or the principal think to himself, oh good, oh finally we got rid of the troublemaker. Everyone's life's going to be much better. There's going to be more peace and quiet in that classroom. That's a terrible attitude. A teacher should lose sleep over this decision. A principal should contemplate hundreds of times before letting any Jewish child go. You know, there was once a rabbi named Dushinsky who was the chief rabbi of his community. And a few people approached him and they said, Rabbi, there's a boy in the yeshiva that's misbehaving and he's causing a lot of problems and we feel forced to expel him. So we need your permission to go ahead with it. We need your haskama to get rid of this boy. And the rabbi thought about it for a long time. He considered other options. He called people. He tried to rehabilitate the boy. And unfortunately, he concluded that there was indeed no other choice. That boy had to be expelled from the yeshiva. But Rav Dushinsky once admitted, he confessed, that for the rest of his life, he fasted on the day that he made that decision to let that boy go. He felt that this decision was one of the most tragic decisions that a person has to make. It's like the Churban Bet HaMikdash, he said. Therefore, Rav Dushinsky said, for me, on that day, when I had to make that decision to let this boy go, it was like Tisha B'Av. Wow. Look at the care and sensitivity that this Rav had when it came to dealing with children. It wasn't a frivolous decision. Oh, this kid's bothering the other kids in the classroom. Oh, no problem. Throw him out and let him go somewhere else. Who needs the headache? You can't do that so readily when you're talking about generations upon generations that you might affect. Expelling a child from school in this generation is considered dinei nefashot. It might just be considered a capital crime because we're inadvertently killing that child. Where is this Jewish neshama going to go? And what is he going to do? He might end up in public school, chas v'shalom. You can't say, well, it's not my problem. It is your problem, and it is your concern. You have to deal with this issue properly because it has great ramifications. When Cain killed Heaven, the pasuk in Sefer Bereshit says, Kol demei achicha tzoakim alai min ha'adama. The bloods of your brother are crying out to me from the depths of the earth. The bloods? You mean the blood of your brother. What does it mean? Kol demei achicha. The bloods. Kadosh Baruch Hu was telling Cain, by you killing Hevel, you also killed all his descendants, all the great and righteous people that were supposed to come out of him, all the good that was supposed to be produced in the world. You destroyed, you severed the lineage. All the bloods of this child, Hevel, are crying to me from the depths of the earth because all the potential was lost. You hear the Musar, ladies? So to expel a boy or girl out of school without doing the maximum without considering the consequences, without seeing that child through at least to another school, is considered irresponsible behavior. However, I know I'm giving a lot of musar to the teachers and the principals out there, but I must say, in defense of the schools, I must say that although we request that the teachers treat our children like their own, and that you should be careful with their neshama, we also have to consider all the demands that we place on the teachers. Think about it. We put over 30 children in their class because the school wants more tuition. But you tell me, how is it humanly possible for a teacher to divide herself 30 ways and give the proper attention, the proper care, and the proper support to everybody equally? You tell me. It's a physical impossibility. Aren't we asking our teachers to do the impossible? In the olden days, there were 10 children in a classroom. When the classroom is small, you could expect more from a teacher. But in our case, I feel bad for the teacher. I mean, think about it. 30 kids, sometimes more, 35 kids. What about the teacher's paycheck that rarely comes on time, if at all? You know that many teachers live in a deficit? You know that a teacher's salary is quite a meager one in comparison to the work that's put in by that teacher? Think about it. The teacher goes home, outside the classroom, and the teacher's preparing for hours just to be ready for one 45-minute session. One 45-minute class. But they only get $35 for that class, which is, by the way, in the best case scenario. So you make the cheshbon, how much they're making per hour. If they're spending 3 hours at least preparing for one class, plus the 45 minutes, divide 4 hours into $35, and you tell me how much a teacher earns. It's less than the minimum wage. So when teachers are underpaid, we don't realize that we're not allowing them to treat our children like their children because they can't devote themselves to this work full time. Why? Because they're forced to split themselves in many ways, and some of them have other jobs just to make ends meet. Of course, the teacher is responsible to fulfill her job appropriately, but it's also the responsibility of the community to see to it that the teachers are compensated properly, that they're paid for their time, that their classrooms are limited in order for them to give your children the best education possible. Ladies, there's a song we recite on Motzei Shabbat where we sing the following words. Some of you may know it, and if you do, you could sing along. What do we say? Hamavdil ben kodesh lechol. He who makes the separation between holy and mundane. Chatotenu imchol. Please Hashem, forgive us for our sins. And then we say, Zar'enu v'chaspenu yar bekachol v'chakochavim b'layla. What do those words mean? Zar'enu v'chaspenu yar bekachol v'chakochavim b'layla. We say, we want to have children and money like the sands on the shores. We want lots of both like the stars in the heavens that are numerous. Now, ladies, it's beautiful to pray for many children, but you don't find really too often where Jewish people pray for so much money. Maybe privately, in the private domain, you're storming the heavens and asking Hashem for money. But this song was written by holy rabbis For them to go to such an extent to ask for money like the sands on the shore seems a little exaggerated. I mean, I understand you want money in order to live, in order to pay your bills, but to ask for so much money like the stars in the heavens? I mean, doesn't that go against everything we were taught about not being so materialistic and simply being happy with what God gave you? But to start asking for money as much as Bill Gates and Warren Buffett have, v'chakochavim balayla. What is this? So Rav Shimon Schwab, alav shalom, explains that parents know that it's not easy to educate children. So we ask Hashem, please give the Jewish community a lot of children. But we know that with all the children that our community is blessed with, if the community is not going to be blessed with funds, these children are not going to be able to receive a proper education, because we won't have enough money to open up another class in the yeshiva or in the school system, or to hire another teacher. We won't have enough money to hire another rebbe or to create another program. The yeshivot and the schools are limited in funding. What should we do, Hashem? What should we do? Ladies, we daven to the Ribono Shel Olam that He should bless our children. Zar'enu. We want the children in our communities to multiply in great numbers. But we don't want to neglect our responsibility to educate them properly. And without money, we cannot educate properly. Now you imagine together with me, if we had unlimited funds. Some of you have unlimited cell phone service and you're so excited. Imagine unlimited funds. Just think of a world where money was available to us. What? Like what? Like the sand on the shores. You know what we would do with that money? We would build yeshivot that were blocks long. And we would create classrooms with 10 children in each class, so they would all get undivided and equal attention. If there were weaker children, we'd create other classrooms based on the level of the child. We'd set up so many wonderful programs that would run in the morning and in the evenings. Teachers would receive a proper salary so that they don't have to work 3 jobs just to be able to support themselves, and they could actually devote themselves to the students in the classroom. We would have all the resources necessary to elevate the child and educate him properly. Imagine! So this song that we recite Motzei Shabbat involves Zar'enu v'chaspenu because they go together. Having a lot of children in the community is wonderful, but you also need money in order to educate them. That's why the tzedakah that you offer, Ohel Sarah, is so special and so important. You're supporting us so that we could continue to teach the adults and the children, and we commend you for that. Your donations allow us to breathe easier every month so that we could put our focus and concentration on providing the spiritual care that all of our students, all the women and all the young girls, they need in this generation, especially now in this time of the coronavirus. We need to elevate their neshamot. So your donation, when you're logging onto ohelsarah.com and you're making that donation, you don't know how you're saving worlds upon worlds and generations upon generations. Ashrechem. And we thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit about Shavuot. On the night of Shavuot, the men stay awake all night in order to learn Torah. That's the minhag. But ladies, you shouldn't feel that Shavuot is exclusively a man's holiday, because it's quite the contrary. On Shavuot, we read Megillat Ruth, which is the story of one of the most righteous women that our religion has ever produced. Some of you know the story, but I'm just going to recap it for you. There was a Jewish man living in Eretz Yisrael named Elimelech, who was married to a righteous woman named Naomi. Elimelech was one of the wealthiest men in the country, and during his time there was a great famine in the land, and Elimelech became very anxious, thinking that all the poor people are not going to come knocking on his door for money in order to buy food. And since Elimelech didn't want his resources to dwindle away, he decided to take his wife and his 2 sons and move away to the city of Moab. This was a huge mistake. Instead of staying with his people, he abandoned them. Could you imagine how the Jewish people felt? As long as they knew that Elimelech was living with them, they felt secure that he was going to help them somehow. But once Elimelech picked himself up and he moved away, kind of ran away, that broke the spirit of the Jewish people. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu punished Elimelech. All that money that he thought he was going to save was lost to him. It was taken away by the Ribono Shel Olam. And after that, he himself died, and his wife Naomi became a widow. Not only that, but because the family moved to an area that was filled with goyim, that affected Elimelech's 2 sons, Machlon and Kilion. They end up marrying 2 goyot, 2 beautiful princesses named Ruth and Orpah. And because they did this, HaKadosh Baruch Hu punished them also, and they die. So look what moving away from the Jewish settlement and going into a goyish place did to this family. They became poor. This is written in the Me'amloes, by the way. They became poor. Elimelech died. Machlon and Kilion also died. And Naomi was left without a husband or children and penniless. This is such a sad story. We have a dignified woman, Naomi, who used to be one of the most regal women in the Jewish nation. She was married to the big philanthropist of Am Yisrael. She was a woman who used to go out with an entire entourage. She was someone who earned so much respect from the people. And here she was in a foreign land of goyim, bereft of a husband and grieving the loss of her only 2 children. She doesn't have a penny to her name at this point. She doesn't even have a pair of shoes to wear on her feet. And on top of all of that, she had 2 daughters-in-law who were goyot. Naomi's entire world just collapsed underneath her. So she tells her 2 daughters-in-law, please go back home to your palace, because I have nothing left to offer you. I'm old. I can't bear any more children that could marry you. I don't have any money, and I'm going back to live in Eretz Yisrael. I don't think that there will be anything there for you. After all, you're the daughters of the king. Please go back to your father and back to your lavish life, just as you lived before. The 2 daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, they don't want to separate themselves from their mother-in-law. They loved her. And they offered to go back to Eretz Yisrael with her and to convert. But Naomi once more tries to dissuade them. She says, please, go back, go back. Orpah kisses her mother-in-law, bye-bye, and she goes back home. Ruth, however, is more resolute, and she remains with Naomi. Verut davka ba. Ruth clung to her mother-in-law. Now at that time, ladies, when each of them made that decision, where Orpah decided to go home, and Ruth decided to cling to Naomi, if you look at that decision all on its own, it's not such a major decision. Think about it. One of those two women decided to help her mother-in-law a little bit more. I mean, many women out there choose to help their mother-in-law, and you don't hear about it in the newspapers. It's not something where you say, oh wow, I heard you helped your mother-in-law. What a tzadikah you are. The truth is, in this generation, it might be takaso. You know, if you help your mother-in-law, that bemet tzadikah. But in those days, to help your mother-in-law wasn't considered such a big deal. What did Ruth do already that warrants so much attention from the Chachamim? She merely decided to escort her mother back home to Eretz Yisrael. It doesn't seem like this decision to go back with the Ami and escort her was such a big deal. So what? So you helped your mother-in-law. Kudos to you. Ashayich. But do you realize that this decision may have been the most crucial decision in history for those two women? Because what happened as a result of this decision? Well, let's continue the story. Ruth went to Eretz Yisrael with her mother-in-law. She had no choice but to become a beggar, going around from field to field, collecting the pieces of wheat that fell from the farmer's hands. Ruth was living on welfare. This was a woman who was living in a palace, and she was now living like a pauper. But eventually, Borei Olam engineered it in such a way that Ruth married a tzaddik named Boaz. From that union, they bore a son called Oved. Oved had a son named Yishai, and Yishai fathered a son called David. Ruth became the great-grandmother of David HaMelech, alav shalom. Wow. But what happened to Orpah? Well, she went back home and remained a Goya. She also had a famous grandson that all of you are familiar with, named Goliath. And many years later, the two descendants of these two women met in the battlefield, and David ended up killing his cousin Goliath. History judges Orpah in a very negative light, but Ruth ends up becoming the great-grandmother not only of David, but of Shlomo HaMelech and the entire Davidic dynasty up to and including the Mashiach. Ruth goes down in the annals of history as one of the most important women. And I ask you, what was Ruth's entire destiny based on? It was based on that decision she made to cling to Naomi. You know what we learned from here? We learned the importance of making a right decision in life. Remember that Ruth could not have known that if she stays with her mother-in-law, she'd eventually marry Boaz and become the great-grandmother of the Mashiach. She could not have known that. There's no way that she could have anticipated such a reward, such a heritage, that out of her would descend the entire royal and messianic dynasty. There was no way she knew that. Same is true for Orpah. She didn't realize that her decision was going to spiral out of control and cause her life to go on a different path, and that she'd give birth to such a Asha like Goliath. And that's a very frightening thought. It's a very frightening lesson. There are so many times that we're careless when it comes to making decisions in life. There are times that we discount a decision and we render it as, no big deal, it's no big deal. At the time, it might not look like such an important decision that you're making, but you never know. That might just be the decision that changes your entire destiny for you and your entire family forever. Now, ladies, I'm not telling you to be paranoid about every decision that you make. No, we're not referring to little decisions, silly decisions like, should I eat a slice of pizza or should I eat a healthy salad? First of all, I'm telling you now, eat a slice of pizza, you'll feel healthier. At least emotionally, you'll feel great. I'm talking about life decisions. One of those life decisions, for example, just giving you an example, is whether or not you're going to attend a Shiur Torah and learn something like you're doing now. The decision to log on, whether it's to Torah Anytime, to olsar.com, to Zoom, or any other forum, to learn Torah. Now, at the time you made that decision, you didn't think you were doing anything special or not special. For some reason, on the day of the Shiur, you decided to push yourself to attend, to log on, to call, to listen. Ladies, I cannot tell you how many times I myself made that decision. I pushed myself to go to a Shiur Torah or to listen to Divrei Torah, and things that were said in that Shiur helped to change my life forever. Something the Rabanit said that hit me, and my neshama heard it and understood it and absorbed it and it forever created in me a different person. Imagine if I would have said to myself, you know what? What's the big deal if I don't go? They're going, let them go, I'll stay home. Ladies, who knows if that's the opportunity that's going to create the greatest destiny. You shouldn't discount a decision when it comes to religion. The decisions that you make concerning Yahadut and your neshama, they are not small decisions. You shouldn't think to yourself, what's the big deal? So if I don't do it, what could possibly happen? If Ruth would have said, if I don't help my mother-in-law, is it such a tragedy? Is it such a big deal? Is it such a tragedy? What's the big tragedy? What's the big tragedy? You're not going to have a name. No one will ever hear you or know you or be inspired by you. No one will ever talk about you. You'll be generic, like many of the people out there. But because you did that mitzvah and you made the right decision, look what you produced in the world. Redemption. You brought about the redemption. You know, two men were once traveling together and they hit a fork in the road. And they could either turn right or they could turn left. And they were both deciding where they want to go, and they wanted to meet together at some point. And at that point, if you think about it, the decision was based on mamish 2 feet. 2 feet to the right or 2 feet to the left. Seems like a small decision. For some reason, the first man decided to turn right. 3 days later, he found himself in California. The other man decided, I'm making a left turn. 3 days later, he found himself in Florida. And the first guy is wondering, how did I end up in California? And the other guy's wondering, 1 second, how did I end up here in Florida? What brought me here? So they both decided to trace their footsteps, and it took them back to that fork in the road. That seemingly insignificant decision to go 2 feet this way or 2 feet that way spiraled all the way down, and one ended up on one side of the country while the other one ended up on the other side of the country when they were supposed to end up at the same destination. Never discount the decisions that you're going to make when it concerns Yahadut, ladies. When you're dealing with your neshama, you're dealing with eternity. Everything that concerns eternity has major ramifications and repercussions. That's one of the lessons that we learn from Megillat Ruth. But there's another lesson we learn, and with this I want to end. And by the way, before I conclude, I do want to remind you all that whoever wants to either re-listen to the shi'ur or forward it to somebody else, it's Be'ezrat Hashem going to post much later on tonight, either on ohelsorah.com or on Torah Anytime, and you could either watch it again or forward it to your friends. So I'll conclude with these words. Boaz, who was a great man, married Ruth because he was obligated to marry her according to the laws of Yibum, which I know you're all familiar with. But Chachamim tell us that Boaz was not the first in line to do this mitzvah. There was someone before him by the name of Tov. So Boaz told Ruth, he said, look, I'm willing to do this mitzvah of Yibum, but we have to follow the protocol. There's someone else in line before me that I have to offer him the first right of refusal. If he refuses, I'll step in, don't worry. I'll take care of everything today. And one day, Boaz finds Tov, and he says, listen Tov, I need to fulfill this mitzvah of Yibum with Ruth. And sadly, Tov refuses. There was too much controversy surrounding Ruth's legitimacy as a convert, and he simply didn't want the headache or to be involved in halachic disputes. Now that's fine. But you should know that Boaz marrying Ruth on that day was not so simple. You see, there was a real estate transaction that also had to take place halachically. So Boaz had to get the necessary documents and make a real estate deal, sell, and do whatever he had to do legally in order to get the transaction in order. Then he had to approach the Sanhedrin in order to acquire permission to marry Ruth despite all the controversy. Now don't forget, she came from Moab, and it wasn't so clear if we were allowed to marry converts from that region. So the Sanhedrin had to convene in an emergency meeting in order to legalize this marriage all in one day. Ladies, think about it. Any one of those things that I just mentioned that Boaz had to take care of, finding Tov, or the real estate deal, getting his act together with the Rabbanim, that would have generally taken a few weeks or months to accomplish. The real estate is obvious. I mean, you can't buy a house in one day. The richest person who has millions of dollars needs a title, he needs a lawyer. This isn't monopoly over here. You can't put $1 million on the table and say, okay, give me the keys. There's a system that requires time and meticulousness and documentation, and yet Boaz took care of the real estate deal in one day. And how difficult it is, think about it, to get all the Rabbanim together in one room, all at the same time, on the same day, where they're all available. It's virtually impossible. Boaz calls an emergency meeting and manages to get all the rabbis to agree to the same day, the same hour, and miraculously they're all available. They're all available to come together. And that night, he marries Ruth, and on that night, she conceives. The very next morning, Boaz died. They were only married one night. But from that night, she conceived and gave birth to Oved. You know what we learned from this, ladies? We learned from Boaz to be zealous when it comes to doing a mitzvah. Imagine if Boaz would have been lax about this whole thing. Imagine if he would have taken his own sweet time. He would have never made it through the day. He would have lost the opportunity to father the Davidic line and the Mashiach. He would have lost his destiny if he wouldn't have responded to this mitzvah with swiftness. Ladies, when a mitzvah comes your way, you should grab it, especially these days. Grab it, grab it, grab as much as you can. Don't push it off even by a day, because you don't know what opportunity you just missed. What salvation could have come down to the world specifically through you. Ladies, sometimes our story of life seems dark and filled with many challenges. There are times your life feels like a roller coaster ride, but your mesirut nefesh will yield such rewards that you're going to get a front row seat to all the miracles that are going to happen on your behalf. Things might appear bleak right now, but life always turns around, and you'll find your path that will lead you to the greatest of destinies and to the ultimate redemption. Amen Ken, Yehi Ratzon. Thank you for logging on to Zoom. Thank you for watching on Torah Anytime and allofsara.com. I want to wish you a Shavuot Tov, Shavuot of Mazal, Bracha and Atzlacha, Siyata Dishmaya, Refuah Shelema, to all of Klal Yisrael, and may we be zeicha to see, Be'ezrat Hashem, the Yeshua Bekarov Mamash.